All right, let's talk about the thinking machine. We're going to dive into artificial neural networks. These are the computational models that are really powering the entire AI revolution. And the coolest part? They're all inspired by the most complex, most powerful machine we've ever known, the human brain. I mean, that's really the billion-dollar question, isn't it? How do you get a chunk of silicon to do things that are just second nature for us? Things like picking a face out of a crowd, understanding what I'm saying right now, or even just predicting what might happen next. For a long, long time, the guiding principle has been pretty straightforward. If you want to build a learning machine, why not copy the best one out there? The idea was to just reverse engineer our own nervous system. Even if we don't understand all the nitty-gritty details, the brain gives us the ultimate blueprint. So, to even begin building an artificial network, we first have to get a handle on the biological one. What is it about the brain that makes it such an incredible computer? Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. You think the brain is super fast, right? Well, check this out. A single neuron in your brain is about 1,000,000 times slower than a basic logic gate in a computer chip. So if it's not about raw speed, where on earth does the brain's incredible power come from? The secret weapon isn't speed, it's teamwork on an absolutely epic scale. Your brain is what we call a massively parallel system. Sure, one neuron is slow, but you have 100 billion of them, all firing and working together at the same time, all linked up in this unbelievably dense web of connections. And that massive parallelism leads to something that honestly just blows my mind, the 100 steps rule. Think about it. When you see an object, you recognize it almost instantly. That whole process happens so fast that the electrical signal couldn't have possibly passed through more than about 100 neurons in a row. There's just no time for long, complicated math. It's all about incredibly efficient, parallel teamwork. So, this incredible biological machine, it got people thinking. It inspired the very first attempts to build an artificial one. And that story starts quite a few decades ago. The whole journey kicked off way back in 1943 with the first ever mathematical model of a neuron. This sparked huge excitement and led to what's now called the Perceptron era in the 50s and 60s. But then, bam, it all came to a screeching halt in 1969 when a famous book exposed one single critical flaw in these early models. And that discovery plunged the entire field into what we now call the first AI winter. So, what was this Perceptron that caused all the fuss? Well, it was actually beautiful in its simplicity. Think of it like a little gatekeeper. It takes in a bunch of information, the inputs, and for each piece of info, it assigns it a level of importance. We call that a weight. Then it just adds everything up. If that total sum crosses a certain line, the neuron fires and gives you an output. The whole magic of learning, then, is just about finding the perfect set of weights. Right, but how does a machine find those right weights? I mean, how does it actually learn from its experience? Well, the answer actually connects back to something you might remember from a high school stats class, linear regression. You know how you try to draw the one single best fit line through a bunch of dots on a graph? A perceptron is trying to do something really similar. It's trying to find the best line, or a plane in more dimensions, to perfectly separate different groups of data. At the end of the day, the goal of this whole learning process is super simple: make fewer mistakes. The machine makes a guess, it checks its guess against the right answer, and it calculates something called the error. Then its whole job is to tweak its weights over and over to make that total error as tiny as possible. This method is also known as ordinary least squares, or OLS. And how does it do that? Through a really clever process called gradient descent. Imagine all the possible errors as a giant hilly landscape. The machine is standing somewhere on that landscape, and its goal is to get to the very lowest point, the valley of minimum error. So it looks around, figures out which way is the steepest path downhill, and takes a little step in that direction. And it just does that again and again and again, slowly walking its way down the hill until it can't go any lower. This whole process seemed incredibly powerful, and for a while it really was. But as researchers were about to find out, there was a surprisingly simple problem that this clever hill-climbing machine just could not solve. There's this classic cautionary tale from that time. The US Army was trying to use a perceptron to automatically spot enemy tanks in photos. And it worked. It got 100% accuracy on their test photos. Amazing, right? The problem was, they later figured out that all the pictures of their own tanks were taken on sunny days, and all the pictures of enemy tanks were taken on cloudy days. The network hadn't learned to see tanks at all. It had just become a very, very expensive weather detector. And that story really gets to the heart of the Perceptron's biggest weakness. It can only solve problems that are linearly separable. Take a look at the simple AND problem on the left. You can easily draw one straight line to separate all the true answers from the false ones. No problem. But now, look at the XOR problem on the right. Go ahead, try it. There is absolutely no way to draw a single straight line to correctly separate those outputs. It's impossible. And that simple, unsolvable XOR problem, it wasn't just a fun puzzle. It was a bombshell. When Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert laid out this fundamental limitation in their book Perceptrons, the dream kind of died. Research funding evaporated, labs shut down, and the entire field entered a long, cold period of stagnation. The AI winter had begun. But of course, the story doesn't end there. The solution to that pesky XOR problem wouldn't just revive the field. It would lay the foundation for the entire deep learning revolution that we are all living through right now. The big breakthrough came from two key ideas. First, instead of just one layer of neurons, people started stacking them, creating what we call hidden layers. And second, they swapped out that simple on or off switch for something more like a dimmer switch, a nonlinear activation function that allows for shades of gray. Put those two things together, and suddenly the network could learn way more complex patterns. This new architecture, the multilayer Perceptron, could easily solve the XR problem. It could basically draw more complicated nonlinear boundaries. And it was this fundamental upgrade that blew the doors open for everything we now call deep learning, from the AI art generators you see online to things like ChatGPT. So, we've come an incredibly long way from that first simple model. Today's neural networks have billions of parameters, a scale that was totally unimaginable back then. But it leaves us with one last big question. For all of our progress, what secrets is the original blueprint, the human brain, still holding back? What makes its learning so unbelievably efficient, and what will the next great inspiration be?